significant. And this is why, of course, the reading of books is important. However, the dangers of the great books Emerson's going to talk about, they are only partially true. And, of course, they are biased to some degree by virtue of the fact that they are ideas that were written by a particular person from a particular time. And, of course, times do change. This is our comment, of course, about Milton and his patriarchal views, as we talked about in earlier lectures, right? Of course, each age, then, for Emerson must create its own books, find its own truths. Now, this is significant and important because there can be an idea that there's one truth that everyone already knew long ago, and all we're doing is just simply rediscovering it. That's one argument. But then there's another understanding that there's different ways to translate that truth, to share that truth. And, of course, the truths of the past have always, we understand, been changed to become new truths. No question. Maybe we would say with Emerson that books often are a product of an age, and therefore each age must create its own books, its own ideas, its own truths. Books, of course, can be dangerous because they can tempt the scholar away from original thought, too much worship, for example, of great minds, and then that can translate into becoming a bookworm. He actually uses the term. There's another fear that genius tries to, in some ways, imitate instead of emulate. He calls it Shakespeare Eyes. In other words, poets who want so badly to be just as good as Shakespeare that they will not be creative in their own right. He talks about the pleasures and the benefits of reading. When done correctly, done well, he'll talk about it. And he even says it, that books will in the end defeat time. And of course, there is a transcendental oneness of the human mind when we engage in great books and in great reading. He makes the observation at the end of this part that schools should foster creativity, not just memorization. In other words, not to just simply drill, but to help us learn to create. It is not enough, can I say this out loud? It is not enough to know what Emerson says in The American Scholar. You have to grapple with the ideas. You have to walk away from an essay like this and ask, what about me? Can I aspire to be a better reader? Can I aspire to take ideas and transform them in new ways? Can I aspire to create something that makes my environment, my country, my world better? That's the challenge that Emerson's going to throw at us. All right, well, let's take a look. We'll begin at paragraph number 11. The theory of books is noble. Wow, I love that idea, right? Nobility in terms of knowledge. In paragraph 12, he talks about each age it is found must write its own books, or rather, each generation for the next succeeding. The books of an older period will not fit this. And I think that's significant. I think that's really important. We have to read the great books so that we can know how we leave the great books and the great ideas, because there are new ideas and there's new understandings. If Francis Bacon's Of Studies were an essay he was writing today, obviously he'd talk in different understandings about technology, but he would still point out that you got to be a good reader, and you got to be a good writer, and you got to be a good speaker. In other words, the truths will be formulated maybe in different ways, but we mustn't just run away from these great ideas and these great books simply because, for example, we don't read as much anymore. Of course, the ideas are the thing that, for me, I want to share most with you guys, right? In paragraph 13, he's going to say, meek young men grow up in libraries, believing it their duty to accept the views which Cicero, a great Roman thinker that we'll meet later in the Harvard Classics, which Locke, an important English philosopher, which Bacon, we know who he is, has given, forgetful that Cicero, Locke, and Bacon were only young men in libraries when they wrote these books. I think this is huge. We want to respect, but we don't want to worship the great writers. When I talk, of course, about these great writers, like I've talked about Milton, of course, Shakespeare, whoever, I understand that it's easy and Emerson as well, for you to assume that everything that these guys are saying must be believed because they're just so amazing. No. We know the ideas, and then we critique the ideas. We challenge ourselves through the ideas. That's what we're working to do here. In paragraph 14, hence, instead of man thinking, we have the bookworm. Now, we should point out that Bacon said this, to give too much time in studies is sloth. I mean, it was Bacon who pointed out already that you can become a bookworm. Studying for its own sake is of no real value. If you're not studying for something beyond, right? So there has to be some idea there in that regards. All right, let's go to paragraph 15. Books are the best of things, well used, abused among the worst. And I think this is important for us to point out, right? Can I say this, though? This is true as well about video games. If all you do is play video games, this, of course, is unhealthy for you. Just as in the same way as all you do is sleep, this is unhealthy for you. If all you do is read books, this is unhealthy for you. There has to be a balance. Yes, there has to be a balance. There has to be a harmony. And, of course, books is a powerful tool. Why? Well, what is the right use of books? What is the one end which all means go to effect? They, books, are for nothing but to inspire. This is what I will always say to you, as I've said to you often. We read so that we can be inspired. We play games as athletes so that we can be inspired. We play video games to be inspired. Think about that. If you're a gamer, then why not begin to think about how you can make your own game that would be better than any game that you play? Instead of just simply escaping in the experience of reading or playing video games or playing sports, understand its value to making you a more complete human being. That's the Emersonian challenge. That's what he means by calling an American scholar the American scholar, right? Paragraph 16. Again, I wish I could just read all this to you, but paragraph 16. Genius is always sufficiently the enemy of genius by over-influence. The literature of every nation bears me witness. The English dramatic poets have Shakespeare Eyes now for 200 years. It's a fun word, Shakespeare Eyes. That is to say, we look at the greats and we are so influenced by them that we wish to imitate instead of emulate. Remember, in our creative writing, we're always talking about emulation, not imitation. Imitation is to try and do it exactly like. I read an Edgar Allan Poe short story, I want to imitate. No. I read an Edgar Allan Poe short story and then I ask, what can I do to emulate, right? To borrow, but in creative ways that make it then my own, right? This is the primary reason why we don't plagiarize, because plagiarizing is robbing ourselves of the opportunity to create. And we would never want to rob ourselves of the opportunity to be free, right? That sounds like a Stoic philosopher named Marcus Aurelius, correct? He continues with paragraph 17. He says that books are for the scholar's idle times. And then he talks about the powerful Arabian proverb, a fig tree looking on a fig tree becometh fruitful. In other words, one fig tree will fertilize another fig tree in the same way that one author can inspire another one. And the challenge here is obviously, let Emerson inspire you. Let him challenge you to be a better writer, to be a better reader, to be a better thinker, to be a better person, a better citizen of both your country and your world, right? They don't have to be mutually exclusive. To be a good citizen of your country is to be a good citizen of your world. You can be patriotic to your country and still be patriotic to the world. They are not mutually exclusive, and Emerson would argue as much. Emerson did argue as much in many of his essays as Emerson's philosopher, but more importantly, he had argued it as Emerson as person, as teacher. Let's continue. The final one that I want to point out is paragraph 19. He says it, there is then creative reading as well as creative writing. When the mind is braced by labor and invention, the page of whatever book we read becomes luminous with manifold illusion. Every sentence is doubly significant, and the sense of our author is as broad as the world. We then see what is always true, that is, as the seer's hour of vision is short and rare among heavy days and months, so it's the record, perchance, the least part of his volume. The discerning will read in his Plato or Shakespeare only that least part, only the authentic utterances of the oracle. All the rest he rejects, were it never so many times Plato and Shakespeare's. This will sound now, and some of you are smiling because now maybe you realize what I was saying about our study of Milton. We can read Milton, and we we obviously don't agree with his patriarchal views and his misogynist understandings about how men are so above women and men have to keep their women in check and all of that foolishness. But we can still read Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained and other texts like Samson Agonistes, and we can be blown away by the genius. Why? Because we take what we need. We gain what we can. We do it, of course, that connecting of new stuff to old stuff in creative ways, no question. And somehow we feel more alive. We have to, of course, learn how to do this better, this creative reading. This is one of the reasons why I'm sharing these Harvard Classics lectures with you. I'm challenging you, and I hope you don't think I'm preaching at you. I'm just challenging you to become a creative reader. Pick up reading and be more creative. Can I say this out loud? When I have my juniors who are ready to take the ACT, my question after the ACT has been taken is, after you finish, can you remember what the passages in the reading section were about? Not whether you got them all right or all wrong, those stupid questions that they get to. Did you do the reading of the ACT reading section so well that you actually learned something? You picked it up and you went, I'm going to learn something when I read this. Part 4, paragraphs 21 through 30. This won't shock us, right? Once we're talking about the past, now we move into the present, and Emerson's ready to talk about the importance of action. This is part 4 of the essay, but it's actually section 3. And here it's all about how the scholar needs action. Physical labor, and immediately we think, of course, of Thoreau, who was so influenced by this idea of Emerson that it's not enough to sit and just read. It's not enough to just learn stuff. You've got to go out into the world and you've got to go to work. Working is crucial, pivotal to making you the successful person you want to become. Of course, what we're saying here is principle must be put into action. There is a natural duty to work. He even gives a really kind of interesting word picture, right? The recreant act, insect larva, which metamorphoses into the amazing butterfly. We'll get to the lines here in a little bit. Everything is about this notion of labor. Labor is valuable in itself because it improves us, he will argue. Life is all about then rhythms and the energy conservation model that we've shared with you before. The idea of being aware of how you expend your energies and doing it in mindful ways. Well, this is all Emerson. I mean, his paragraph 21, we'll just go through these really quickly. For example, there is no scholar, he says it. Inaction is cowardice. There is no, he says, inaction is cowardice. There can be no scholar without the heroic mind. Right? You got to go to work. You got to get up and go to work. It can't just be about reading books and coming up with ideas. Paragraph 22, he will say it. The true scholar grudges every opportunity of action passed by as a loss of power. In other words, try to live every day without losing your opportunities, right? It's a loss of power if you don't use your time wisely. You're sitting in a class. The teacher is droning on and you're bored. Wake yourself up and say, I gotta find something I can do with this time right now to better or improve myself. Maybe listening closer. Maybe trying to find some way to get to work with some ideas so that you're always trying to improve yourself. That's the argument that's being made here. The optimism that I've argued before is fundamental to what it means to being an American is born in an essay like this, right? We should be a country of workers, a country of seekers, a country that enjoys that working and that seeking at all times. Why? Well, I just used the word power. Remember, attributed to Bacon, although probably not actually literally said by him, knowledge is power, right? Paragraph number 23, a strange process he talks about, the process of learning. 2, by which experience is converted into thought as a mulberry leaf is converted into satin. The manufacture goes forward at all hours. You're always learning. You're always connecting. You're always trying to figure out new ways to think about this world and how you can make this world a better place. Paragraph 24, he makes that idea of in the contemplative hour, the idea that there is this amazing metamorphosis that can take place, and out of the larva will come the unfurled, beautiful wings, that is the angel of wisdom. What a beautiful line. The angel of wisdom, the butterfly of wisdom. In other words, and the next time you look at a butterfly, think about this image. It's a powerful one. This image of the butterfly who starts out not looking like a butterfly, and yet beautiful, beautiful. And then just to jump to paragraph 26 really quickly. I love this one. Life is our dictionary, right? I learn immediately from any speaker how much he's already lived through the poverty or the splendor of his speech. Wow. Now this is a beautiful, he says it, this is the way to learn grammar, through your speaking. I've said it to you before because I think it's such an important part of what it means to be a well-educated person. You have to learn how to speak well. You have to learn how to exchange ideas with individuals. It's a learned skill set. And you have to be able to walk up to somebody and introduce yourself and say, "Hi, who are you? I'm so-and-so." This is an important part of what it means to study and to be a scholar. That ability to connect with other people through your speaking. He says it, learning how to speak is such an important part of whether you are poor or rich. It's not about money. It's about one's capacity to exchange ideas. Well, it doesn't shock us that after these four parts, Emerson will in turn, in paragraphs 31 through the end of the essay 45, paragraph 45, to what he will refer to as the scholar's duties. What is the thing that a scholar must do? Let's play now around with some of the ideas and then look specifically at some of the lines. After Emerson discusses how nature, how books, how action are all part of the education of the scholar, he's now ready to talk about the scholar's obligations to society, right? In other words, you are being educated by your nation. And the understanding is that you will then turn around and become a citizen of that nation and a citizen of the world to make this place better, leave the world a more awakened place than you found it. And of course, that is the obligation of the scholar. Emerson will talk about it first in somewhat abstract terms and then in the most practical of terms because that's how his mind works. He wants to make sure that you get it at the practical level. The first duties, of course, he's going to say it. Before you can help anybody else, you got to help yourself. Think about the ways in which at Whirlwind High School there are students who are always wanting to help other students, but they're so jacked up themselves, right? And so the minute they start offering advice, somebody says, well, yeah, but dude, look at you. I mean, you got serious problems. And so Emerson begins first with the individual and then goes to society. And what about the individual? Developing self-trust. It's huge. Confidence. Think about the number of times when you meet a challenge and your first instinct is, I don't know if I can do that. Emerson says, are you serious with me? Come on. You've got to develop a self-confidence that says, I trust myself. How is that born? Well, through the challenges that are, he lists them, inevitable for the scholar. Poverty, hardship, boredom, right? Sometimes you're bored. Solitude, you're going to spend a lot of time by yourself if you're a student, because obviously when you're a student, you're studying and you're reading, right? He also talks about the importance of self-sacrifice, right? Of course, all athletes know this, right? We pointed this out before. Athletes, it's not that they love to run up and down and do sprints like running lines on a gym floor, and yet they understand. This is why I've argued for a long time. If we have become a country that is just fascinated and focused so much on athletics, and I applaud it, I think it's a good thing, but it's a learning tool. Why? Because every athlete knows if I'm not training, I'm not winning. Training will involve self-sacrifice, won't it? Right? Emerson will use the example of the astronomer sitting in the lonely work of doing the astronomy, and yet, obviously, for the benefit of others. The true scholar, then, will share the wisdom of the past in new ways, right? And I hope that in some ways I'm channeling a little bit of Emerson as I play this game with you guys in the Harvard Classics. These are old ideas, but I'm hoping that I can share them in ways so that every generation has to rediscover the old ideas anew. The perennial philosophy, as it's sometimes referred to, because it's an old idea that hard work pays off. It's an old idea that self-sacrifice is important. But we've got to find new ways sometimes to maybe understand and say it. Of course, the true scholar has to remain independent as well. This is huge, right? Discovering universal ideas, that is to say, the world's eye and the world's heart. The scholar must be brave. There has to be a level of courage here to improve society by first improving oneself as an act of courage and hope, right? And then finally, Emerson will finish his essay by outlining different ages of Western civilization. First, the classics. We, of course, are thinking here about the Greeks and the Romans. Then the Romantic period, of which, we normally think of even Emerson's time, right? That Romantic period of Wordsworth, Byron Shelley, Keats, Goethe. And then finally, what he calls a reflective or a philosophic age, which we would probably call today the age of the moderns and postmodernity itself. And he admits that while he's talked about all of these, he's talked less about differences and more about similarities, because he's wanting to focus on the ways in which there are certain kinds of ideas that all scholars have understood from the very beginning. He does then propose an evolutionary development and picture of civilization, kind of like a child who moves from childhood to adulthood, right? He comments on his present age, the first half of the 1800s, as an age of criticism and revolution, and he says it's good. In fact, he says, I wouldn't want to be in any other time or place. To echo those lines of words of Whitman in Song of Myself, passage 46, I know I have the best of time and place, and was never measured and never will be measured. He applauds certain romantics as he finishes the essay. He had met Wordsworth, and he applauds Wordsworth. Of course, we've given lots of lectures on Wordsworth and Tintern Abbey and The Child is Father of the Man, and I could wish my days to be bound each to each by natural piety, from his little poem, The Rainbow. He also mentions Goethe. Both of these, he says, were inspired by common people. That is to say, the ability to see in democratic ways, everyone is precious, everyone matters. All people's lives